Chapter 3 TIT. The horror. The horror! Let me say it right now. I wasn't scared. I was beyond scared, to the point where I could no longer think. My horn flared up instinctively, illuminating the darkened room with a burst of gray light.
Ugh, stupid pony light.
The heavy and strained voice of my uninvited guest cried out whilst I pulled myself onto my hooves. I didn't need my helmet's EFS to know that this creature was hostile. I went to ready my grenade machine gun, only to remember that I wasn't wearing any power armor. And worse, my grenade machine gun was a chewed and blown up pile of slag, likely buried under about an inch of snow by now. The angry super pony had finally adjusted to the sudden burst of light and proceeded to enter the back room. I backpedaled quickly, glancing around the room in panic, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. Unfortunately, the back room seemed to lack any implements of war. Not even a filthy knife. "Oh, Buck!" I screamed in a totally non-Philly fashion as a hoof like a brick barely missed my left ear and went into the plaster wall behind me. I scrambled to my hooves and ran across to the other side of the room as the massive pony heaved his hoof out of the wall, leaving a gigantic hole.
Stand still and die!
Yeah, like that was going to happen. I bolted over to my power armor, opening up the steel saddlebag. The ground trembled as the mutant pony made a charge at me. I yanked out the assault rifle and leapt out of the way as meat and bone met magical power armor. Power armor 1. The mutant pony staggered back with a bleeding skull. I grinned as I levitated the rifle around and fired. Oh, come on! The assault rifle was empty. No better now than a steel baton. The assault rifle swung through the air and smacked my would-be assailant. I didn't let up, focusing on beating the massive pony with my improvised club. The stallion angrily snapped his teeth and swung his heavy hooves at the rusty gun as I skirted around the aggravated pony and once again over to my power armor. All I needed was a weapon. Any weapon with ammunition. I started rummaging around inside of my saddlebag. Crunch. The sound of crushed metal greeted my ears. I turned around expecting the rifle to be stomped under hoof. Instead, the angry giant had unslung a sledgehammer he was lugging around on his back and smashed the assault rifle into the ground.
Time to die.
Never was such a muffled sentence so terrifying. The massive sledgehammer swung back as the heavy pony charged at me, preparing the haymaker of all hammer blows. I did the only thing I could, which in no way involved screaming like a little filly as I practically threw myself into a sideways roll. I howled in pain, feeling the hammer blow graze my ribs, and I tried to drag myself away from the mutant pony. A deafening gun report made my ears ring, before the very heavy and meaty corpse of the super mutant slumped forward, landing on top of me. Elder, good to see you're still alive. Crosshair walked in, speaking around a sawed-off shotgun that he had in his mouth. He placed the shotgun in a small sack he was carrying on his side before moving over to help me. Elder Inkwell, meet the super stallions. Crosshair tapped the dead super stallion on the back. Come on now, super stallion. Introduce yourself to my elder. Crosshair glanced up at me and sighed. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, Elder Inkwell. I heard them come in, and I got up to deal with them. Crosshair trotted over to my sleeping place and picked up my helmet. This one must have slipped past me. He gestured to the beheaded mutant before he waved a hoof at the door. Can't breathe. Heavy corpse crushing me. Crosshair, standing on his rear legs, used his front legs to slowly lift the body off of me. I took a deep and grateful breath, wincing as my ribs reminded me that they were in pain. We cannot delay treatment any longer, Elder. Your ribcage looks distressfully out of place, and you're covered in cuts and bruises. Before I could respond, Crosshair began clearing a patch of floor, my mattress having been caked in blood and brain matter. Whilst Crosshair busied himself, I decided to loot through the super stallion's corpse for anything that might prove useful. He had been wearing some rough leather armor, full of bullet holes, and a metal dish of some kind had been bent and warped beyond recognition. It shaped into a single shoulder pad. Searching the armor for pockets proved fruitless, earning me nothing but a damp and bloody hoof for the trouble. I tried to open a saddlebag, cage, on the beast's back, resembling a shopping trolley that had been compacted much smaller than the normal dimensions through sheer muscle power. I tried prying open the steel backpack. A very small piece of metal, evidently meant to act as a lock, resisted my initial efforts. The lock finally started to give as I twisted firm metal in my telekinetic grip, when Crosshair started poking at me. "You blind fool! Are you so strung out that you can't see how misshapen your chest is? Lie down now, before I have to make you." I wasn't about to take this crap for my own first night. I did my best to imitate the glare my old drill instructor gave me and opened my mouth. "I'll have you know," and that was as far as I got. My head spun as I fell face first onto the cold floor. I awoke to a wet, meaty crack and an intense pain the likes of which I'd never experienced in my chest. Cold bands held my legs splayed wide as my struggles began. Sinister zebra laughter echoed in the dark, dank room, and I'll admit with shame that I peed myself. A deep chanting began as flames danced on the edge of my vision, illuminating a hideous torture room. When I tried to focus on any one thing, my vision blurred and warped, making the shadows seem to distend and flex in unnaturally lifelike ways. The screams of the damned seemed to emanate from empty cages hanging from the roof and standing on tall, thin spires. I felt it more than I heard the blade as it danced along the walls, just barely eluding my sight. A terrible longsword, shaped like a scalpel, generated sparks as it was scraped across the walls. The tip of the blade glowed red as fresh from the forge. "Ah, Elda. Good to see you're awake. And here I was worried that I had hit you too hard." The gleeful and all too familiar voice whispered right next to my ear, making me flinch. "Crosshair? What the hell are you doing?" I stammered, my eyes bugging out as Crosshair rose up so he could face me. His eyes were solid globes of orange light that left glowing contrails as he moved. His coat, normally pure white and black, was dried rust red by the layers of dried caked blood that soaked him. His terrible visage slowly swam out of focus for the moment, to be replaced by his normal self. A look of concentration and concern flickered on his face before returning to a smile that literally reached ear to ear. The scalpel sword spun on the tip of his left hoof before slowly coming to a stop, the blade's tip pointing directly at me. The knife moved over my chest, the heat from the blade blackening my coat without even touching it. Looking down as it ever came closer, I could see that he had already split me open like some kind of lab experiment gone horrendously wrong. As the infernal blade reached over ever closer to my ribcage, an intense feeling of vileness washed over me, and then my organs began to squirm. Flexing and slithering away, they tried to avoid the torture implement with seemingly sentient fear. "Keep your eyes open, my humble elder. Your insides tell of death and decay. Watch them now as they tear and sunder, then turn black and rot away." The nightmarish zebra smile seemed to only grow wider as the blade tip descended, the hot edge searing flesh and charring bone. For a moment, the dark room vanished. Crosshair was a white and black striped blur, in red splotches, speaking in tongues for all I knew, his hooves working methodically inside of my chest. For a moment, his teeth grit, and I felt more than heard a pop. Then my whole chest moved, and the unbearable pain I had barely endured blew my brain like a fuse. Wintertrot is entirely different when it isn't being assaulted by snowstorms. The sun actually does break through the clouds here. Admittedly, it's only slivers of light, but they add so much more color to the gray drab world we inhabit. Watching them through a gritty, warped and boarded up window using Crosshair's rifle scope was my main source of entertainment for a good half of a week. I lay on the mattress sullenly, the days passing very slowly for me. I felt a pang of guilt as I watched Crosshair head out each day while I recovered. My magic might allow me to use weapons, as long as I wasn't hurting too bad, but my body needed time to heal. I held onto the shotgun Crosshair had used. I decided it would be best to probably familiarize myself with this crappy, yet effective gun. I took the weapon apart, looking for ways I might be able to improve it. It was already kind of a liability, being such a short-range weapon, but maybe I could make it more reliable. I levitated the broken remains of my assault rifle out of the saddlebags in the corner. The sad remains of my temporary firearm were tightly crushed together, so I had to take my hooves, teeth, and magic to pull the gun apart. The main body was completely useless, a caved-in mess, but the firing pin, safety, grip, and stock had survived relatively intact. They were certainly in better condition than the shotgun's own parts. I first decided to try and replace the firing pin first. I mean, it should be the easiest part to swap out. Unfortunately, the shotgun's firing pin was thicker than the rifle's. Cursing, I decided to compare the stock and safety, finding them both to be inappropriate matches. I threw the rest of the rifle away in frustration. The shotgun could be powerful, but it was limited to being short-ranged. I levitated the 12-gauge shells over to me, turning one of them over. I levitated a combat knife from my saddlebag and carefully slid along the side of it, from top to bottom. I then set the shell on top of an old magazine, the Who's Who of Canterlot, and peeled open the plastic shell to examine the inner workings. There appeared to be a large metal slug resting inside the metal case of some sort. Carefully pulling the shell wider, I slid 2 pieces of metal out with my telekinesis. Behind the casing was a plastic padding with holes in the side of it. Pulling this out, I was confronted by a tightly packed wad of paper. The wadding was actually a bit hard to get out, but after removing this, I was finally able to see the shell's powder. Levitating over a dry tin can, I dumped the powder into it. Looking down into the brass shell of the casing, I could see the primer sitting in the center of the bottom. Looking at the odd assortment of items that went into the ammunition, I tried to imagine it working in the weapon itself. Firing pin to primer. Primer ignites powder. Powder punches into wadding. Wadding squishes and absorbs some of the shock. Then the strange plastic bit. It seemed to have a spiral line of support. Taking impact from the wadding and powder, the structure would collapse slightly, giving a bit of a twist. Then the casing and slug would launch down the barrel. Looking at the casing, it was obvious that the slits on the sides of it would catch along any rifle barrel, making for a nice spin on the slug to help its accuracy. It all made sense now, and with a little help, this ammo could be easily improved. And I had the ideal ammo I could use to make the improvements. I levitated out the 25mm grenades from my now non-existent grenade machine gun and decided to take each one of them apart. The smooth grenade shell was easy for me to disassemble. All I needed was some empty shells and I could make some proper ammo. Crosshair returned that night, carrying pieces of frozen meat and some kind of small animal pelts. I figured not asking about them was the safest route to take. He had been a lot more talkative, trying to get me to talk about my time as a younger ranger. I usually deflected the questions with half-truths, giving a lot of vague answers like, "It was alright," or "Can't really complain." I mean, I should have been thrilled that he was talking to me, but the events 2 days prior, the nightmarish version of him hovering over my chest, still had me a bit spooked. It was difficult being in the same room with him at times. I never said anything, but I knew he could tell something was wrong. The awkward silence we were enduring whilst waiting for the slightly irradiated meat to cook was stifling. I glanced at the ground, desiring something that I could talk about. "I see that you have been busy, Elder. I notice you've decided to destroy your grenades for some reason." I felt a smile creep onto my face. Now I had something that I wanted to talk about. "Not entirely, my striped friend. I haven't been destroying the ammo. I've been repurposing it." I paused briefly to reach for the box of modified slugs I had kept close at hoof. "These are what I've been making." I levitated one over to Crosshair, his face showing genuine curiosity. He played with the shell, seemingly weighing my modified slugs in his hooves. "It is heavier," he stated, obviously perplexed. Frowning slightly, he brought it closer to his face, examining it with his critical eye. "Much heavier." "I know. Brilliant, isn't it? It's my very own custom-made slug." I beamed, showing pride at my own hoofwork. "Elder, I hope I don't need to tell you that overpacking powder is not a safe method for making a stronger round." His eyes widened suddenly. "Please, stars above, don't tell me you've mixed the propellant powder with the grenades." "Only one way to find out," I said with a smile. I started hovering the shell over the fire, and Crosshair went whiter than usual. "Nah, I'm just fooling with you. No sense in spoiling a perfectly good dinner." Crosshair let out a sigh of relief, slumping slightly. "We can test fire the rounds right now." Crosshair bolted, the room door swinging as he darted downstairs. The next morning, I was well enough to walk with my power armor on. I wouldn't have any trouble supporting myself. The suit would just have to do. 70% of the work, at least. I decided it would be a good idea to test out the shotgun, so we started looking for a lone mutie to practice on. It had taken a lot of acting, and maybe a medics or two to make things more convincing to get Crosshair to relent to my demands, but in the end, I like to think my infectiously good humor and charm won out. We saw a couple of their hulking forms down the end of one of the streets, and Crosshair spied another one on one of the roofs, wielding a giant missile launcher. We slipped past the super stallions, looking for an easier prey. We ducked through alleyways and hid behind bins and other old wreckage, searching for one lone super stallion, hoping one would trot right past us. Crosshair, how prevalent are these super stallions? I whispered as we emerged onto one of the streets, clear of the vile mutants. They are fairly common, especially in the commercial district. Crosshair's eyes scanned the street with the well-trained eyes of a hawk as we moved onwards. I found the cold to be much more tolerable than it had been earlier, and I relaxed a little, hoping the worst Wintertrot had to plague on us was behind. We passed through the frozen city. My helmet's EFS combined with Crosshair's knowledge of the city kept us relatively safe. We had to avoid a few streets due to the number of super stallions crowding them. Several tense hours of sneaking through the ruined streets had put us both in sullen moods, but for different reasons. I was of the mind that we could, with the shotgun rounds, probably take on 2 mutants at once. If we got the jump on them, at least. Crosshair seemed to be growing tired of my pestering at him to test my perfectly safe innovations. Elder Inkwell, the chance of finding a lone mutant in this city is like finding just one blood sprite. There's always more just around the corner. Well, no, Cross. I've certainly seen lone bloat sprites before, I argued. Besides, couldn't you make that argument for, like, anything? Crosshair's eyes twitched, right before he gave me a deadpan stare. Oh, I'm sorry. Who's lived most of his life in Wintertrot again? I decided not to answer. I could tell Cross was getting in more irritable mood. Our lack of luck in finding lone mutants to shoot was not going to deter me from firing the shotgun. All right, fine, Cross. You win. This time. We will give up the super stallion hunt. Crosshair couldn't keep the smug grin off of his face. Well, you can just shoot that door over there instead. Crosshair face-huffed, letting out yet another sigh. Hilda, I do not think that is a good idea. I nodded, ensuring the barrel of the shotgun wasn't jammed with snow or anything. Hoofing it over the zebra, I rolled my eyes. Look, Cross, stop worrying. Just fire the gun. It's perfectly safe. I then proceeded to the minimum safe distance of 30 feet, behind a broken brick wall. Okay, go ahead. Crosshair proceeded to just stand there and stare at me. You said this was supposed to be safe? He asked, looking at the gun like it was a rad scorpion waiting to sting him in the eye. Completely safe, Crosshair. Just go ahead and fire off that little beauty. Crosshair fidgeted, glancing between me and the door. If it's so safe, then why are you all the way over there, behind a wall, in power armor? He put emphasis on power armor, giving me an accusing glare. Giving an exasperated sigh, I face-huffed a bit harder than I meant to. Ugh. Cross, I'm standing at Brotherhood standard procedure safety distance for testing new armament and munitions. Come on, stop being such a cocknoodle and just fire the damn thing already. Crosshair threw up his forelegs in frustration, before standing on his rear legs and aiming the shotgun with his forelegs. In retrospect, I probably should have mounted it on a battle saddle. Stars above, please protect me. Crosshair mumbled around the shotgun trigger before pulling it. 2 things happened. The shotgun fired, and Crosshair simultaneously performed a backflip due to the recoil, eyes as wide as dinner plates. The door that he was aiming at opened, just as he fired. 1 second, there was a vaguely pony-esque shape. The next, there was a fireball and broken set of double doors. I ran out of my cover, concerned the shotgun barrel might have breached, or worse. Crosshair was unconscious. I approached the downed zebra, shaking him gently. He rolled around, aiming the shotgun at my face, his gums bleeding and nose looking distinctly squashed.
This is all your fault,
he bellowed, before lowering the shotgun and massaging his nose with his left hoof. I tried. I really tried to fight it back, but Crosshair's nasally vocabulary brought involuntary giggles. Crosshair glowered, trying to take a swipe at me.
It's not funny.
But before I could start making jokes about Crosshair's speech, one of the broken doors was kicked off of its hinges. A super stallion stepped out, his face blackened and cut with broken scraps of a helmet that was on his head.
I'm going to wear your bones around my neck.
The obviously pissed off mutant bellowed, charging at us. I levitated the shotgun over, loading the first round that I could find into it. Shoot it, shoot it, shoot it! I ordered in a calm, if loud manner, handing Crosshair the shotgun. He complied, aiming it using his forehooves, his tail acting like a counterweight and keeping him balanced. The shotgun roared, sending us both tumbling as Crosshair crashed into me. The super stallion was engulfed in an explosion, the shotgun shell completely decapitating him.
Push it.
Crosshair grumbled. I shrugged, standing up, and I started walking.
Push it. I want a push it.
It took a second for it to click in, before I mentally face-huffed. Oh, right! Healing potion. My bad. I uncorked a bottle of the cherry-colored concoction and hoofed it over to him. As some rather unpleasant crunching and cracking sounds came from his nose, Crosshair downed the liquid. I think we can safely say that this weapon test has been a complete success. Crosshair eyed the shotgun before he nudged it towards me. You're the one with the power armor and hoof-mounted drills, Elder. You can use it. I gave a half nod, not sure how to respond. Crosshair clearly didn't enjoy my innovative ammunition. I levitated the shotgun into my saddlebags, plans already forming on how I could mount it onto a battle saddle. You know, Elder, I almost mistook you for a filly in that power armor. I suddenly liked it better when I couldn't understand him. I kept my complaints to myself, grumbling a little as we walked over to the steaming corpse. Nothing. This one has nothing on him, Crosshair muttered to himself as he searched the body. Hey, what about over here? I asked, pointing to the doors that had been blown off. You think there might be something over here worth taking? The interior of the building looked like it led down some hallways, possibly into an atrium of some kind. It should be worth a look, Elder. Crosshair mused before we made our way inside. A large banner was hung in the atrium, proudly proclaiming, "Welcome to Trotsworth Independent Technologies." Crosshair gave it a glance, and then continued to scan the room, his rifle sitting in his recon suit's battle saddle. Looking again at that banner, I froze and felt a stupid grin spread across my face. I giggled, causing Crosshair to give me a confused expression. Then I burst out laughing, much to Crosshair's alarm. Hilda, are you mad? What is the matter with you? I chortled, pointing at the banner. That banner! Its initials! The initials for Trotworth's Independent Technologies is TIT. Tit. Crosshair's deadpan expression was back. Clearly, he didn't share a sense of humor. I sighed and lifted my helmet off to wipe away a mirthful tear. Crosshair shook his head, walking ahead whilst mumbling to himself about immature ponies. Suddenly, he paused about 5 feet from me. His ears twitched, his head turning to the right quickly. Crosshair aimed his rifle at a large stallion that came barreling into the atrium. His eyes glanced at us both quickly, before looking behind himself.
Quickly! Get down! This will be an ideal ambush spot.
Without waiting for a reply, the stallion barreled into Crosshair, scooping the confused and struggling zebra up and onto his back. He dropped Crosshair behind an old receptionist's desk and galloped over to me. Wait, who the buck are you? That was all I managed to get out before the massive stallion clotheslined me into cover with him. He crouched low, peeking just around the pillar where we were hiding. I tried desperately to not make too much noise as I struggled for air. However, breathing seemed less important as a series of heavy hoof falls cracked the fragile floor as a group of ponies entered the room.
Come out, come out. We know you're here.
That voice. The all-too-familiar voice of a super stallion. After finally getting hold of my choking, I edged around the pillar, sneaking a glance at them. There were two, both of which were wearing heavier armor than the ones we'd encountered earlier. Clearly, we would need a more cunning plan. I spotted movement in my peripheral vision, and turned in time to see a minigun being leveled and aimed just beside my head. My eyes! Sweet Luna and Celestia, my eyes. The brightness of the barrel blinded me as it unleashed a hailstorm of bullets. The weapon's roar deafened me this close to my head. God, why did I take my helmet off? The minigun slowed down and finally stopped, but the striations along my vision and the dull thunder in my ears didn't. The large stallion poked me, trying to get my attention. I could see his lips moving, but all I could hear was a damnable ringing. What? I can't hear anything! What? I bellowed, my own voice sounding muffled, like listening in through a thick door. I pushed my hooves against my ears, popping them in vague hope of reestablishing my hearing. The large stallion trotted away from me and began speaking to Crosshair, the large unicorn looking a bit embarrassed as he spoke. I decided to go and loot the super stallion's corpses, whilst I waited for my hearing to come back.
I'm dreadfully sorry about that earlier. You know, heat of the moment and all that.
The pine-green unicorn spoke, smiling sheepishly as we walked through the corridors.
I don't believe I've properly introduced myself. I am Mustang. Perhaps you've heard of me?
Honestly, I hadn't. Then again, who names their colt after a breed of pony? Albeit the most stallion-esque pony. No. I haven't heard you before. He seemed to deflate a little. Sending his eyes into a distant stare, he took slow but deep breaths.
I am Mustang of Thunderhoof,
he boomed while striking a pose on his rear legs.
The savior of Crow's Nest, and the bringer of indiscriminate justice to the forces of evil.
Watching him was sure impressive, and for a moment he seemed to be backlit by a slowly growing glow. Staring a bit harder, I noticed his mane sweeping gently in the breeze. Still being inside, I couldn't help but wonder where that draft was coming from.
I also cook,
he added casually. I very quickly decided that I needed him for my contingent. Crosshair could cook decently enough, but it was all exotic zebra stuff that had a weird aftertaste in my mouth. And I am a little ashamed to admit that my own wilderness survival skills were more than lacking. I took the two-legged stance myself and introduced myself. Well, hey, I'm Melder Inkwell, current leader of the Wintertrot Steel Rangers. I wobbled a little bit and went right back down. And over there's my first knight, Crosshair. Cross was standing on his rear hooves to reach a high shelf in one of the rooms we passed, and gave a wave with one of his free forehooves. Honestly, how did Mustang and Crosshair manage those weird poses for so long?
Say, aren't you a little too young to be an elder?
Mustang asked, eyebrows raised. Why, yes. Yes, I am, I stated proudly. I kinda left out the part about my contingent being burnt alive. That would have put a downer on the conversation.
Truly it must have been fate that I stumbled upon you in your hour of need,
he said, as he grabbed me into a massive bear hug. A small groaning sound emanated from my power armor as the giant muscles along his body flexed, and I could feel a steadily increasing pressure on my healing ribs. I said intelligently. I would have protested that we didn't need help, then remembered I did need help. Crosshair could take care of himself easily enough, as he did live here after all. Mustang finally let me down, and my armor's repair talisman started to kick in, easing the warped armor on my chestplate back into place. The burly stallion trotted over to Crosshair.
Hi-ho, my zebra friend! I see a warrior's spirit in your eyes.
Mustang's white teeth shone through his thick black beard as he smiled. Crosshair was in a deadpan mode and nodded in recognition as he went about looting the drawers of an office desk.
Tell me, Crosshair, was it?
Crosshair nodded as he added to the pile of scavenged loot he was piling up.
Ah, yes, Crosshair then. I wanted to know if there were any more of your striped brethren within this noble order.
My heart stopped. I didn't know whether it was a good idea to tell Mustang there were only two of us. More importantly, I didn't know if my zebra ranger would have been peeved at his people being classed as striped. Crosshair spoke before I had a chance to intervene. I am sorry to say that my brothers and sisters do not share my elders' values, he said, his eyes flickering over to me for a moment. Mustang raised one of his big, bushy eyebrows and looked back to me.
You're saying there's only two of you?
He asked, seemingly taken aback. I nodded lamely, realizing how silly it sounded. 2 rangers, alone in hostile territory? Surely Mustang would think we were a pair of loons and leave. At the moment, yeah.
That is
He swept Crosshair up in one of his arms.
truly noble.
His thunderous voice echoed out throughout the building. I swear I saw icicles on parts of the roof vibrating at the sound of his voice.
In enemy territory, against insurmountable odds, the Steel Rangers boldly continue to protect the weak and innocent.
Mustang had released Crosshair and pulled off a valiant pose, one hoof raised as he spoke.
I, Mustang, shall hereby be honored to follow brave souls such as thee.
I swear I was seeing tiny sparkles around his face, and unless he was hiding a tiny unicorn's horn beneath that bushy curly mane of his, I had no explanation of it. Very good. I smiled awkwardly, looking to Crosshair, who was now watching me as well. I hereby promote you to Knight. Mustang's eyes seemed to somehow darken. I hereby promote you to Star Paladin Mustang. A stray beam of sunlight cut through the hole in the roof, illuminating Mustang. The stallion nodded at me approvingly, and I felt the atmosphere warm up considerably.
Now then, let me introduce you to my gun,
he said with a winning smile, leveling his weapon at me. Footnote. Level up. Inkwell. Level 2. No level advancement. New trait added. Fitful rest. Due to recent events, your mind has become a disturbing place. You need to sleep 50% longer to feel refreshed as others. You are also more likely to have bad dreams. This trait is not compatible with the deep sleep perk. Crosshair. Level 2. New perk added. Calling Dr. Hooves. You know your way around the equine body. With this perk, you are capable of performing emergency medical procedures in less than safe places. Mustang has joined the party. Mustang. Level 1. New perk added. Bigger guns. You love big guns and have the muscle to move them. You can wield large and cumbersome guns with ease, including non-equine heavy weapons. Traits hidden. What exactly are you hiding?